I think last time we were talking about wrestling rules and how they changed over time, and especially something I brought up was the um, idea of how mats changed grappling.
You, I actually think even Sonny asked that, right? Didn't you?
Yeah, well, that was just something that I was coming up with as we were talking, I guess, and it turns out Rama had done an Instagram post on it already kind of
Yeah.
looking at it because we were talking about the effectiveness of pinning and how people don't really respect the pin these days in submission grappling, and just that if the mats weren't so comfortable, maybe maybe
Mm.
the pin would be more uncomfortable, shall we say.
Mm. Makes a lot of
But Rama,
sense.
you'd already looked at it, hadn't you?
Yes, I had looked at E.C. Gallagher's book Wrestling, which I think was published in 1920 something. And
I can tell
in
you
that,
I have it on my desk right here.
uh,
It's
I'm
1939.
I'm sorry, 1939. No, no, no. He had an earlier version that he must have had two publications then
got the
because
second edition, Andy. You got
yeah.
Yeah, damn it.
um, I remember he had it was right after World War One or right after ish, and I remember thinking, oh, that must have been a shitty time to run a wrestling team. But yeah, in that rule set that he had proposed was the idea that if you brought a knee to the ground, it was a point. So if you had a good snap down, like literally, you could just snap someone down and get a million points and win your match. There are also a couple very ambiguous scoring criteria. Like just being aggressive literally could get you a point. Being aggressive on top could get you 2 points. So I think those were like stand-ins for near fall. And then yeah, in all the pictures, it's either like they're demonstrating techniques. It's either on grass or concrete. So it tells you kind of what the wrestlers were accustomed to in their training.
Yeah, so maybe you can just even talk about the phrasing you talked about in your Instagram post because I felt like that was really interesting.
Yeah, so we say modern wrestling, we say changing levels or shooting. And he was very specifically using the word diving. He'd say
Mm.
dive, which is literally the exact opposite. So like when we imagine diving, we say the head is below the hips and the back is the opposite of straight. It's parallel or even at a declined angle to the ground.
Yeah, like you bend at
And
the waist, right?
yes, yes, that's what he's doing. So from what I see there, it's a very different idea, and it's also a lot about kind of like your deadlift strength. So
Mm.
like yes, you got a leg, and can you move into position to deadlift the leg? That's most of it. Um, that's what I noticed at least in a lot of the techniques he shows.
Yeah, when you shared that on Instagram and when I read it, I just got the book right away because I felt like, oh, I need this book in my life. And when I read it and looked at the pictures and what you wrote, the first thing that came to mind was MMA because like we have people like Ben Askren who is obviously a very
Yes.
very very knowledgeable wrestler. And what does he do in MMA for his doubles? He bends at the waist and just picks up
Mm.
the legs, right? There's no shooting at all, and I think that's really the point. That if we discuss how technique looks, it's not about just is it correct, is it right, is it wrong? Because obviously Ben Askren knows how to shoot a double. That's a fact probably better than 99.9% of people in wrestling. But the fact is because of the constraints and the conditions of the environment he's in, it changes everything. So that's the point. So Mets obviously you don't want to shoot on mats, right? Because if you do it bad, your knee gets kind of screwed.
Don't do it on concrete, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just, yeah.
So what else do you think would obviously change without mats? Because I feel like we all practice in an environment where we are very comfortable and familiar with mats and sometimes the gi and stuff like that. But let's just start off this conversation by imagining how grappling would look like if we would do it like on the streets, right? On mats. So obviously you wouldn't shoot on your knees. So
No,
would you want to be on bottom guard, Sonny?
no, not at all either. I mean, you with or without a comfortable place in the street, let's say, even if it was on grass, I don't think if you're in any kind of self-defense situation, you don't want to be on bottom anyway. But you don't, concrete, there's gutters nearby or, kind of sharp edges. You wouldn't want to be on bottom. It's not going to be a comfortable lazy man jiu-jitsu guard, kicking back. If
Okay, maybe let's not take the extreme of concrete. Let's say we start a grappling club or a jiu-jitsu club, right? And we don't have mats. Mats don't exist. So obviously we would probably meet at some place where there's grass or maybe sand.
okay.
I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, sand. I mean, you can go to the classic fights on the Brazilian beaches, but sand sucks to get in the eyes or the face or the mouth and everything like that. So again, you want to be on top. You don't want to be really playing guard with sand dropping down into your open mouth as you're gasping for air.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But
So beach wrestling is fine, but beach jiu-jitsu probably not a good idea.
ugh, it sounds like a terrible idea.
And you guys have seen Palvani and
Yes.
like you know that they're wrestling in this dirt,
Mm.
and man, it gets everywhere. But like, what they do to it is they condition it with. So it's first of all, it's a type of clay, and they mash it up with like some kind of oil too, so that it actually congeals a bit. So that's why they have to, every time they are about to train, they have to break it up with a shovel.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up into the air and then get up all in your, it does, but it's not as bad as it would be with like just straight sand.
Yeah, exactly. And from what I've seen and heard, it's really the mud, right? It's not sand. It's kind of mud. It's wet. It sticks, but it's not that. I don't know. It clumps more. It doesn't get into the eyes and stuff like that. And in ancient Greek wrestling, it was exactly the same. They even oiled it with olive oil because they believed that it has like it's healthy for the skin. It helps with stopping infections. The other thought was if there's sand in the mud, then you would maybe get scratches on your skin, and that's why you oil it. And it was really, really also in a very cultural thing that, like you said, preparing the mud with these shovel thingies was also part of the strength and conditioning training, right? And it's also in India. It's like you prepare for every match the mud area with this shovel, and at the same time you do some strength and conditioning workouts. Which how does this? If you watch these training montages of MMA fighters where they use sledgehammers on truck wheels, right? It's exactly the same movement.
Yes, it is. I mean, interesting too. Just not to go too much off a tangent, but Indian Kushti is from Persian Kushti, and if I'm correct, it arrived, roughly 1,000 years ago, and kind of co-opted the indigenous style of wrestling that had existed there. And I wonder too, like how much did the dirt come with it, or was dirt already used in the indigenous form, and then we just kind of took this pin form of wrestling as the newer, better version. Yeah, very curious about that. I mean, that's obviously more of a question than an answer, but something that's been on my mind.
I mean, from what I've seen, but to be honest, I didn't research, especially Persian wrestling that much. From what I've seen, I kind of always thought of the mud wrestling as a very Indian thing. I don't feel like I have seen much, heard much about mud in Persian wrestling. But
it's a Persian thing. Like they
okay.
Pehlwani. It's called kushti also.
Yeah, right.
So
the wrestling, but do they use the mat too, or do you?
They do. They do. They have them also. It's a much more of a cultural thing. They have something called the House of Strength, and it's more of like something that young men are. It's like a rite of passage for a lot of young men.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole club swinging also came from there, which I'm actually a big fan of. It fixed my shoulders. I had really, really bad shoulders, and then I got me some Indian clubs and just learned some basic swinging exercises, nothing too fancy, and it really helped the mobility, strength of my shoulders, and it stretches out the connective tissues. So big recommendation, check out Indian clubs.
Sounds
great.
like what I got to do. My shoulder needs might need a bit of club swinging.
Yeah.
So is this like the Persian clubs that are like kind of bulbous, or is it like the Indian club that has a ball at the end, the gada?
It's the Persian one, but
Okay.
I think actually, I always approach my strength and conditioning training very, very basic, and I feel like for me, the point is swinging something around, right? So I guess both work very well. They probably work your shoulders a little bit differently, and I would say is just get anything or even both, because it will be good, because I strongly believe the shoulder is made to swing, not to bench press.
I'm down with that. I'm gonna get on eBay and order.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you could jerry rig it. Like if you take like a 2 liter bottle of Coke and just fill it with sand and put a stick on it.
I think it would work.
For sure, right?
Don't see any reason why not. And even the Indian, right, the gada, it's basically they just use a broomstick and stick it in concrete, right?
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, so maybe let's go back to grappling without mats. So Sonny, you did a beach wrestling tournament, right?
Yeah.
And you already told us that it's mostly takedowns, no groundwork.
Yeah, well, this one they let a bit more groundwork go on, which wasn't great. They allowed some scrambling and stuff to happen. Until they called position, which the sound was very annoying, shall we say? It's not like it was going to stop people from grappling, but it was just, after each point, it was everyone's hopping up and spitting out a bit of sand. And
did they like condition the ground at all? Did they put some water on it or anything?
No, they didn't do anything like that. It was just
hardcore
flat,
Australian.
just a flat stuff. That's it, mate. It didn't have approval from the council. They just put up some cones and just let's go.
Oh, nice, man.
I love it.
If anyone comes down, it's the thought process was it's no different than, if we just gathered in the park to play a game of footy.
Absolutely.
We're just gathering on the beach to do some beach wrestling, and it just so happens that UFC champion Robert Whittaker's in there wrestling there as well. So,
I'm not sure if you told me that story, man.
Tell us, man.
I didn't. No, I didn't. Did I? No, he was. He was in the. He entered the competition too after. Um, I don't know. It was a couple of weeks after he lost to Izzy. Um, yeah, no, he just turned up on the Manly beach and went in the beach wrestling comp, and obviously he won. He won his division. There was a brief moment I was thinking about going up a division just to get a chance to wrestle him,
That'd be
but
amazing.
but that was like 100. You know, it was like 100 kilo division or something, and I was pushing it as it is as it was already. I went in the 93 kilo division, weighing in at 84 point, like right on the below, right on the bottom of that division. So, but yeah, so that was actually like he was competing in like all the local comps he could after that for a while, like jiu-jitsu comps and everything like that. So it was pretty crazy that it was just like a little beach wrestling comp and with 20 people watching or something, and here's Whitaker who just got back from like I don't know how many 60,000 people at the Rod Laver Arena or something, but
What a dude.
yeah, it was cool. And then he had a match with a like it was like just like a little kid who was there, and they didn't have anyone to go against, so they did like an exhibition match, and it was like that was cool, man. That was just,
Oh man, I hope they got video of that.
they did, yeah. No, they put it was like Oz sub only was the competition, and they've got they did a little highlight video, and there's that's got the clip of Whitaker with the just mucking around with the kid, making their day, you know. And then you know what? Apparently, I'd left because I had to do after the competition had finished. I'd left. I had to go, but apparently there was some smaller judo guy ended up calling Robert Whitaker out of the crowd. He was like this really pumped up. He was like really pumped up judo guy, right? He was like maybe like one of the smaller divisions, like 60 kilos, but he was yelling with every throw, and he won his division and really hyper. Okay. And apparently he ends up calling out Robert Whitaker at the end, and they have a match, and Robert Whitaker obviously wins, but yeah, I missed that part. So anyway,
sounds very funny.
Did you see anyone get injured?
After I left as well, I didn't. So no one got injured. Apparently, after I left, when they were doing these, the proper competition had finished, and this guy called out Robert Whitaker, and apparently they're like, anyone else want a match? There was two guys, I'm not sure who they were, but they had a match and got thrown. One guy broke his arm or dislocated his elbow or something like that. So yeah, apparently, which is always why you should stick to your schedule of when you're going to stop. I think it's always that last match, that last thing that something goes wrong.
Wondering too, like if we were to compare injury rates between the mat and sand, like would we see an increase or decrease? Because I would, at least from what I'm hearing, like people are much more respectful of the earth when they know that it can hurt them, or at least they have that hesitance. Whereas on the mats, people have a lot of people really take it for granted that like, oh, I'm going to get thrown on the mat, but it'll be okay. I'll get up. And like, I don't think people understand that.
Yes.
You don't, especially I think from kind of a wrestling background, you assume, yes, I got thrown, I will get back up. But that whole getting up process might be a little harder.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I do it in judo, since the break fall is a big component of judo, right? In my kids' classes, many coaches use a lot of these very fluffy, big throwing mats, right?
Mm.
And of course, I use them to get the new kids used to it, but I use them very, very sparingly, because I noticed that if you use the soft mats too much, they don't develop the right breakfall mechanics, and so I know they always tell me, oh, can we use the big mats? Oh, it's so cool, it's fun, and I know it's fun for them, but I also say I've really focused on even the beginners train on the thin, hard judo mats, because only this way will they develop the right breakfall mechanics, and which is in the end way more important for their safety, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so
Yeah, there's actually something curious too. Um, so in the E.C. Gallagher book, he mentions the value of judo and jujitsu. He says jujitsu, like I assume that he was
yeah,
acquainted with it, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I do believe he talks about the importance of gymnastics and breakfalling.
absolutely, yes. So
So
in my, I mean, I in judo I teach a lot of children, because in Germany, judo is probably the primary combat sport for children, right? So we have a huge drop off for adult competitors or even practitioners in judo, but we have a huge community of children practicing judo. So I teach a lot of children, and yeah, I do a lot of gymnastics, like a lot of it, because I noticed and I always believed, when it comes to children, I would much rather teach a 10-year-old kid who has done gymnastics how to do judo than to start off with a 8-year-old who has cannot do a forward roll, because I believe
mm,
it's so important then that you have the coordination, and that you have um, the how is it called, the proprioception and all of this stuff. I think it's really important for children to develop. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, from a wrestling side, Rama, do you teach or break falls in wrestling, or did you learn break falls in that?
ever. Yeah, we do rolls and cartwheels and round offs, but never break falls.
Yeah, that's what I thought. My wrestling coach was the same, and that surprised me to hear it. I'm like, do you guys you ever do break falls or anything? And no, not never, not once. It's just ever you just pick it up or something. He's like, just learn, be like a spring, be like a ball.
I think it
But
depends, because I feel like, from my experience, falling from a judo throw and falling from a single or double is very different.
Mm.
So to be
You're
honest,
not being quipped.
yeah, to be honest, when I teach wrestling, I don't teach break force at all.
okay, yeah.
What I focus
So
on is to start ease them into it, right? So you can start with a single leg and just run the pipe and do it cautiously the first few times. People get used to it, protect the head and stuff like that. Um, but that's also why, right, when I teach grappling, it's mostly adults who start with it, so they don't have a huge background, and that's actually why I don't teach a lot of judo throws, because I feel like you actually need um, a lot of experience as an adult to deal with the force. Because if you teach children, they are much lighter and don't get hurt as easily, and you have time to develop them for judo. But it's really hard to teach someone judo when they are old. It's very hard.
Mm.
so
Interesting.
now when you are teaching judo, what kind of like are you just on the regular like 2-inch mats, and what's the is the Kodokan, is that just on wood or something like that?
No. It's
It's
the
not just on wood.
regular judo mats.
Okay. But I wouldn't, before the invention of good proper mats, I wouldn't want to be getting thrown.
Yeah.
So I don't like getting thrown on good mats either. So
Yeah. Maybe we can get
I
back.
mean, there is a difference. I mean, there's a difference between wrestling mats and like judo and jiu-jitsu match. Have you guys felt the difference there?
Yes, there's a difference, definitely. So
Like wrestling mats have like a memory foam kind of feel. Like they
yes,
definitely like, and they pool sweat differently, and like just feels they're really comfortable. Like you could like I don't know how many naps I've taken on on wrestling mats, or jiu-jitsu mats for that matter. But like wrestling mats are really, really comfortable.
Yeah, and you sink in more, right?
Yes,
So
yeah,
if you stand, the dent in the mat is way way bigger. You
right.
sink in more, which I actually think like if you do Greco or something where there's a lot of pushing involved, I actually think it helps because you kind of
Mm,
sink in with your feet and can really grip the mat.
mm,
Whereas in judo, to be honest, if you aren't a heavyweight, it doesn't dent in at all, kind of. Maybe a little bit, but it's not like you feel like you really form the mat in any way.
yeah.
Um, and so that's actually what I wanted to ask Sonny about the beach wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like your stance or even your movement is differently? Because I feel like obviously walking or jogging in sand, right?
Yeah,
It's a lot harder on the body. So I would imagine, tell us about, did it feel differently, the stance, the motion, even shooting? Did you do anything else or did it feel different?
definitely felt different. So yeah, the comparison with beach jogging is spot on because it was just, those each step when you get your foot, you got to let it sink into the sand a little bit. So I didn't like change my stance. I don't think, not maybe not consciously because probably didn't have time to do it, but it definitely would have made some, unconscious changes just with how I'm moving around. Um, and it was a lot more tiring, Each step was a little bit slower, a little bit more energy, a little bit more exhaustion
Mm.
because it just takes a little bit more to get your footing on there. So it slowed the footwork down for sure.
How large was the play area?
Um, I'd say it was about the size of a standard wrestling
Okay.
mat. Um, and it was a point for push out as well. So that was, sometimes it gets to you can dig in a little bit easier on the sand, I think, to stop the push out. But it was, yeah, it definitely changed how the footwork had to take place.
Okay, I will pitch you now something I just came up with.
Mm-hmm.
In winters, we do wrestling on ice.
Far out, no way, man.
I mean, that would look probably very funny.
Snow, maybe.
Ah, snow,
Snow could
yeah.
work.
Yeah, snow would work.
Yeah,
We
Yeah.
used to play
not.
football in the snow. That was really
Okay.
fun because you like first of all, like everyone's wearing snow gear, so they're super slow, and then you're landing on snow for everything. So like it feels,
Nice.
I don't know, it was like really fun.
Nice.
Yeah, the ice, I can already hear the back of my head hitting
Oh
the
God.
ice and bouncing off that. I can hear. But snow, you could get. Yeah, I could come around to that. You know,
Nice.
just
So,
I'm sure someone's played
yeah,
around with that before.
pretty
I'm
sure.
sure.
I guess in all these ex-Soviet Russian countries, I bet it's a
Right.
big
They
part.
would have had a comp. They would have had a comp in the snow.
Yeah, man.
You guys hear about how Eskimos used to wrestle, or I guess maybe still wrestle?
Who?
No.
Oh, Hero of a Thousand Holds ruined
Ah, okay.
an episode about Inuit wrestling. It's the only wrestling style that he found where they start standing, but they get two grips directly on the hair.
Ah, yeah, I heard of that.
What?
Like they get the right hand first, then the left hand, and then they go. It's like
Wow.
Crazy.
So I mean, if they're doing it up there, it must have. You know, anyway, that's what we should add to our next wrestling rule set.
Yeah.
You have to grab the
That's
hair at all
that's
Yeah.
right.
times.
That's right, Andy. Add that to the list of grappling. It's got to involve hair pulling.
So it's pin, submit, and hair pull. Okay, awesome.
Man, I don't know if I'd be down for that.
I mean, I'm thinking about how could we make wrestling on ice work? If you're in full winter gear and then you start on your knees or something, okay, and you can't go to both feet. Okay, we can figure something out.
Well, have you watched any of the ice hockey fights?
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's a great documentary on Ice Gladiators or something, I think it's called, and there's a good movie called Goon. But I mean, that's got to be getting close at some points. That's maybe an idea for a breakdown.
yeah.
Look
Yeah.
at look at
Oh,
some grappling
interesting.
exchanges in ice hockey fights because
What
man, they go for it.
I always felt like it must hurt so bad punching the helmet, right? Because it's just
Yeah,
hard
but
plastic.
and they have those gloves on, or do they take the gloves off before they hit each other?
Oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so they take the gloves off. The guy's still wearing a helmet. You bash the helmet with your
Yeah.
right hand. Oh,
Yeah.
God,
It's so stupid.
that's silly. Silly.
it's crazy, man. It's like
I mean, I really want to watch that documentary because there must be unspoken rules, right?
that's it. There's all these unspoken rules of the ice gladiator, the enforcers, or I think was this the proper name, or
Yeah.
the goons was the derogatory name. They're like, hey, we're not just goons.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
We have honor.
yeah, they do. It's a big thing, and it's like the enforcers are out there protecting all the other players, and they get they're seen as these honorable members of the team that
yes.
put themselves on the line to protect everyone. It's fascinating
And that
to
is
think about.
exactly my issue with this whole oh yeah, crazy jiu-jitsu is so great for self-defense because valetudo is not assault because in fact there's a culture
About
behind
to
it.
sneeze, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, there's some stuff you just don't do. People, I mean, for example, people don't pull ears. People, yeah, I don't know. People don't fish hooks, maybe, but it's mostly a duel of two men trying to decide who is the better fighter, right? It's not about assault. It's also not about killing somebody, and also it was exactly the same for pancration, right? The ancient MMA of the Greeks, because there weren't any rules, at least not many, and people always assumed that pancration was really, really, really brutal. But if you read the historical accounts of pancration, it's actually not that brutal because there was a really huge codex of stuff you wouldn't do. So, for example, pulling hair, pulling fingers, stuff like that was allowed, but it was really frowned upon by the spectators. And that's why people usually wouldn't do it, even though it was allowed.
That's interesting because yeah, we're often told that it's like that. Yeah, it was just more free for all in fighting.
Yeah, it was allowed, right? But also it was these guys were really they were big stars, right? And so they being prestigious and honorable and was also really important for them at these times. So I guess it was also implicitly not only if you win, but also how you fight.
Makes me think. Have you guys heard of gouging
I
as like
gouging.
a
Oh,
fighting style?
the American judging.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus, yeah. I literally ran into that I took an American history class, and I had never heard of it before, and I must have been 18 or 19, and the history teacher brought this up as like a form to show how crazy America was in the early 1800s. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, you probably know more about it than me then, but yeah, it's like it was fighting as a way to settle beefs or dueling kind of before the invention of portable firearms or something, I think. And the goal was to gouge out your opponent's eye, which was that was winning. It was just as much damage and maiming as you could possibly do was the intent. But it seemed to be there was at least enough structure around it that they'd given it a name of gouging. So is that on the mark, Rama?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, obviously it's been a while since I've read that piece, but yeah, and it became enough of an institution that you'd find gougers, and gougers would allow their nails to grow long and sharpen them, and maybe even sharpen their teeth.
That's yeah.
What the fuck?
Dude,
I never heard of this stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It just reminds me of Game of Thrones right now.
Oh yeah, with, what's his face? The guy from Dorne.
Yeah.
It seems pretty dark.
Oberyn, I
It's
think. Yeah.
Over it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah. I mean,
Really crazy.
like super duper disgusting to hear to read about it. I remember thinking about it and just saying like, "Oh man, this is how it was." Um,
Why didn't they
so
just
anyway,
wrestle? They can settle their beef this way.
I don't know, man. That was.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think it was especially big in like Kentucky and like
Yeah, it was somewhere around there or something. They eventually brought in a law against it or something.
Crazy.
and this is like I mean, not to get like too sociological, but like in America, I would consider it like a shatter zone, like one of these highly contentious areas where you have a bunch of smaller tribes or families, and then they get in feuds over and over again, and that's just like it's the place where people are fighting a lot. So maybe it makes sense that something like this would develop, but I've never heard of anything like it at least in a soft institution kind of form existing anywhere else.
I guess why.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's it. Because it's like obviously it's like, well, that's a street fight, I guess. No, but
Yeah.
for there to be enough structure that it was kind of a thing is disturbing.
Yeah, right. Growing your nails out and shit, like, oh God.
Yeah, filing the teeth just to
Ugh.
you need to be able to get a better chomp on something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And guarantee you they weren't on mats then. I tell you.
All
There's
right.
no mats at all.
So let's go to our Mets discussion, right? So we kind of discussed sand a lot. Obviously, I guess there's no competition of grappling on concrete, so as far as I know. One thing maybe we don't have to discuss in depth because it's just something I wanted to point out is, for example, Mongolian wrestling is on the steps. Is it called steps in English?
Yeah.
Okay, the steps. So it's basically just grass and dirt. And the rules of Mongolian wrestling are basically sumo without push-outs. So if anything other than your feet touch the ground, you score a point. And I think that's also because they don't have mats, right? Because, you just say, okay, let's wrestle, and your knee touches the ground or your hand, boom, point. Let's go. So that most points, I would say, from what I've seen, again, I'm not an expert because sadly there's not that much footage of it, but you can find some if you really search. And from what I've seen, most points aren't scored with really big takedowns. They are scored by getting a knee to the floor or your butt, right? Just you fall to your butt. And I think that's because of no mats, mostly.
I actually had trained with a guy that had lived in Mongolia, and he had done judo before going to Mongolia as a student, and he decided to train in Mongolian wrestling too. And he was just saying, when he came back, he had such a respect for foot sweeps and like just the ability to get a knee to the ground and stuff.
Absolutely. I actually think Mongolian wrestling, because I'm a really big fan of Mongolian judo, right? I love how they do judo, And so a few years back, maybe 2-3 years back, I really dig deep into Mongolian wrestling because I wanted to understand their judo style, because obviously most of them grew up doing Mongolian wrestling and just switched over to judo to compete internationally because they were very, very good on the national level, which is Mongolian wrestling basically. And from what I've seen, like these foot sweeps are huge in Mongolian wrestling. And they are in some ways very differently from judo foot sweeps because they wear mostly heavy boots.
Yes, exactly.
And you don't have exactly the same gi. So for those of you who don't know much about Mongolian wrestling, there are two styles. One style is like you have almost like a very tight jacket, but it stops at your ribs, so it doesn't go down all the way. So it's just the upper part of a jacket, but it has sleeves. And the other style, they have like a leather harness without sleeves. So it's just a very small vest, basically. And so they don't have sleeve grips. So they do a lot of kicking, almost, foot sweeps, where they grip this harness around the shoulder area. And yeah, like I said, their foot sweeps are not so much with the sole of your feet, how it is in judo, but it's mostly almost kicking with the boots or the shin almost. And so the mechanics are a little bit differently. And I think it's very interesting actually. If you know judo or wrestling, you should check out Mongolian wrestling because you can see that it's different, but yet there are many parallels. And I personally took a few techniques from there for myself. Not a lot, obviously, but there is some stuff you could really pick up.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, not to get too to the equipment, but like the boots are especially fascinating because they're large enough, so they go up to almost the knee, like they're up the shin. And this same guy, the instructor, was saying that if you're just chilling out, like if you're just waiting for something, the boots were high enough that you could kind of passively kneel in them.
Okay, interesting.
So yeah, so you just allowed your weight to go to your heel and you just allowed your shin to go forward. And basically they're stiff enough that you could kneel standing.
Very interesting.
It limits your ankle mobility substantially, obviously.
So that's the perfect how we can discuss the next point. Because after we talked about mats in wrestling, let's talk about shoes. Because I think most of you train with shoes and in wrestling or boxing, and without shoes in jiu-jitsu, judo, or MMA or whatever. So what's the difference? Shoes or no shoes?
I mean, I'm way faster as a wrestler with shoes on.
The better grip, allowing you to.
I think that's a huge one.
Put more pressure on, especially in jiu-jitsu when you don't have the shoes, and sometimes you'll be trying to drive forward just in like side control or something, and your feet will slip, and you got to think that if I had some wrestling shoes on there, I could have been able to put more pressure on or escape a bit easier. So it for sure changes it.
Yeah, what I always thought of when thinking about shoes and grappling is the very high finish from the single leg where you put it in your armpit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you almost grip it like an ankle lock. So if for the guys who aren't that familiar with wrestling, so you basically get a single leg and then you pull it up very, very high until you almost have an ankle lock grip. So you grip really at the end of the heel, and you catch the foot this way. And I would say it's bless you, and bless you. And I would say it's one of the probably highest percentage finishes in wrestling I guess.
Mhm. High single finish. Yeah.
Yeah. But you don't see it in jiu-jitsu and you don't see it in MMA because yeah, you can limp leg out, especially when you're sweating, way easier if you don't have shoes. So that's really important to keep in mind if you study wrestling for jiu-jitsu or judo for jiu-jitsu or jiu-jitsu for judo or wrestling for judo. I don't care. Always keep in mind there are some intricacies and techniques and details that will not translate. And this is one very good example because the high finish is very, very strong in wrestling. But I'm not convinced that it's a very good idea in grappling or MMA. Obviously, it can work, but it's just not that high percentage.
For sure. And that conversely, the limp leg escape becomes so much more powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really a big fan of your Whitaker study, Sonny, because
Yeah, okay.
I think you pointed out for people who aren't familiar with wrestling, for me it's not so much about Whitaker, but you did a really good job on pointing out all the major defensive skills in wrestling, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely was kind of what I was trying to do, and the other one that I've kind of been thinking about doing something on, which is a perfect example again, is Jose Aldo. He's
Yeah.
just man, that's how he was able to, reportedly out wrestle all these good
Uh,
wrestlers
feeding the
in the
single
wrestling
leg
room.
and
Yeah.
then limp legging
Oh
out.
man, just turning his hip, limp legging out, just over and over again.
Yeah, which is also what I do. I don't limp leg out, but I think it comes from me doing judo for so long. When I first started grappling or jiu-jitsu and people grabbed my single leg, I didn't have any wrestling background, right? So I didn't so I didn't fight the hands. I didn't try to get a whizzer. I didn't try to dig an underhook because at this point when I started, I didn't knew this stuff. I knew judo. So what I always instinctively done because of my training was to really, really turn to the side. So turn, almost giving up my back, but turning, not facing him like you would probably mostly do in wrestling, but literally turning to the side. So, and from there I would usually try to attack Uchimadas, obviously, but also, which came very, very easy to me, which I've done a lot in competition, is from there attacking rolling knee bars and stuff like that, from the sideways position. And I feel like Aldo uses the side on position a lot, with the difference I attack more judo throws, or did in the past, or leg attacks even, and he limp legs out. But I think that's really something for people to think about. Yes, you can. The basics of escaping the single leg are like underhook, a whizzer, disconnecting the hands. But there's also some value in this really sideways positioning, I feel like.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, like, yeah, you try that with the shoe on, and it's a lot more difficult if you get that shoe caught. It makes it a lot more difficult. So
Yeah, also heel hooks with shoes get wrecked, mate.
Oh God. Look
I'll
at the
tell you
difference
guys.
between, just to
I'll
give you
tell
guys
you.
a little bit of warning, I have to leave in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, Sonny, go ahead.
Okay, I'll tell you. Yeah, heel hooks with shoes on. Right, I was in jiu-jitsu class. I was wearing my wrestling shoes. Okay, and one of my friends was, playful banter going on between us, and he was, giving me a bit of grief about with the shoes on. So he
I
actually,
would do so too.
yeah, exactly right. And I'm like, oh, like, no, I'll wear them if I want to. Screw you. But then we get into a leg entanglement. He gets us into the 4-1-1, and then as he's just locking it off, and he's slowly proceeding to undo my shoelaces as I'm trying to fight it off, but it's not going for the sub. He's just trying to get the shoe off. Eventually gets the shoe off and chucks it over to the other side of the room. I'm like, okay, mate, you got me.
I mean, that counts as a submission, right?
That's a sub. That's tapped out. Let me go get my shoe in disgrace.
Very fun game to play in your kids' class, or maybe even for warm-up, is do grappling, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, I don't care, with socks, and the goal is to undress the socks.
That's fun.
There you go.
That's a tournament. That's
another tournament.
There's going to be like some sticky sock handle. I glued their sock on or some shit. Then you have to have the referees like literally manually apply each sock before they step on the mat.
And
that'd be hilarious.
One competitor has a green sock, the other one a red sock.
Dude, how amazing would that be? That's the entire goal. It'd be so good.
All right. So we covered mats and the lack of mats. We covered shoes and the lack of shoes. Is something else about shoes? Let's think about it.
Shout out to Cornish shin kicking before we move on from shoes. You know.
Was that the guy who undressed your shoes?
No. Do you know Cornish? I'm pretty sure it's Cornish shin kicking.
Yeah.
It's like wrestling the upper body wrestling. They grab onto each other, and the goal is to kick each other in the shins as hard as they can. And I've seen they do some recent competitions where they fill their shins with like hay or something like that. But my understanding was that, it was like get some steel-toed boots and just kick each other in the shins for a good time.
Right.
Sounds like a thing Tony Ferguson would do.
Exactly, it does. He'd be really good at that. He'd win it every year if he wanted to do that. So the goal is not to put you on your butt, or not to.
So. I'd have to.
It's like to make you give up.
I think so. I'd have to go look again. It's been a while.
Yeah, but this kind of shin kicking is also a big part of Irish collar wrestling, right? It's this ancient style where from the literature, people always were really fond of kicking somebody's legs out from underneath.
Well, they call that. I think it was called heel hooking as well, or something.
Exactly. Yeah, they call it hooking also. So they'd have hookers and throwers or something, and that was like kind of that big distinction.
Right. I knew of the term hooker, but I never knew that's where it originated from. Very funny.
Talking about prostitutes now?
Yeah, what are you talking about, Andy?
Come, baby, kick my shin.
Undress my
shoes.
Might be time to wrap it up.
All right. So there's more stuff we didn't discuss. So we can do it at the next episode if you want.
Maybe we'll do next time is we each bring like 2 topics, or one of us sets a theme and the others bring 2 or 3 topics just to unload.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, awesome. Because the next thing I would have discussed now is clothing. Right? Because
that's huge.
That's very huge. Probably the biggest one of all these. And maybe as a teaser for our next discussion, if we wrap up now, is I propose, since everybody talks about, would it book in street fight, and is the lapel realistic or not? Let's do this. We do grappling with streetwear, kind of, so we get rid of the lapels. We just use like very sturdy sweaters, basically, and pants and wrestling shoes, and see how jiu-jitsu looks then. Because I feel like the gi is just an artifact of ancient, traditional Japanese clothing, right? So
Yeah.
just from an just let's say practically, there's literally no reason we keep wearing that gi. I don't say get rid of it. I say make it more modern and Western. I think it
Okay.
would
All
vary
right.
differently. A lot
Okay.
of stuff.
I got some contacts in Pakistan that can help us out when making that.
Yeah, man. I just imagining right now like the gi fabric, and then like gi pants. Obviously, you don't have to change those. Then you
Oh,
wear.
you have to make them skinny jeans.
Dude, where do you live? And then you wear wrestling shoes, and then you have like a with the gi fabric, like something always looking like a pajama top, right? It would look very, very funny, but I think it would be much more realistic if that's the goal.
I'm interested. I need to see some sketches,
Bam.
but it could be a start of something.
We're revolutionizing grappling one step at a time.
I like it.
I mean, there's a reason that the Mongolian wrestling and like room and stuff has like such a. They just have to use like a leather strap basically around one part of the body.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of what if we minimalize it, that's what it would turn into.
Yeah, kind of, but I also feel like, for example, if you just wear streetwear, right? This whole notion of gi is unrealistic. I always felt like that's a really really stupid statement, because people wear clothes 99% of the time where there's a physical altercation.
0% of the time on the actual grappling podcast.
And I mean, you can do collar chokes with a t-shirt, right?
Yeah, and in winter,
Budget, yeah.
got a coat or a hoodie.
Yeah,
Man,
you can do a lot of stuff. So and sleeve grips are huge, dude. If you don't have to wear a jacket, just a long sweater. If a judoka gets your sleeve once, you're done. That's it. So it changes a lot. If you don't know how to break the grip, that's a different story. But if you don't know how to break grips, and I get your hand once, your sleeve, that's it. You cannot punch. You can't do anything if you don't know how to strip grips.
Oh, it's a lot harder to break grips on thinner fabric too.
Exactly. That's why I always felt like this whole judo is less realistic because the gi. I was like, no, dude. If we fight and you wear clothes and I grip you once and you have zero experience of jacket grappling, you're fucked. That's it. Yeah, but I mean, I personally, for me, one of the parts I focused on my own competitive career was grip fighting. So I'm really, really, really big on grip fighting, and I studied it a lot. And I have ask anybody I train with, I have very strong grip strength. If I grip your jacket once, you're fucked. That's it.
I would like to get your opinion then on some strong grips or just different, because with your physics knowledge as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. I can nerd out on that. I love the science of grip strength and grip fighting. There's a lot behind it actually, which could be a complete another topic for podcasts, because actually having a strong grip makes your whole body stronger, and there's science behind it.
Yes, this is what I want to hear. This is what I want to learn, Andy.
Yeah. Interesting.
Same with the bite. People with a strong bite are usually much stronger.
Is that why they're filing their teeth off to gouge people?
What the hell? Where are you reading this? Okay, this is definitely another episode.
Yeah, it has to do with your ability to neurally contract muscles, right? So people who have who can create stronger contractions in general neurally, which usually is your grip and your bite, are usually the muscles who contract the strongest in your body. There is some how would I say, there's some it carries over to other stuff in some way. So just neurally having strong contractions. For example, just try to clench your fists very tightly right now. Right? And touch your shoulders or your biceps.
You mean I should have been relaxing them? I was clenched this whole time, bro.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I thought...
Yeah, but
Okay, so
like
like
I said, that's another topic entirely.
Interesting. Right. So call it a day today, and then we'll some topics with more themes or more topics next time.
Yeah, I would propose that we start the next podcast with discussing clothing or the jacket a little bit.
Sounds good.
And then let's see where it goes. Like, it's casual. We can talk about whatever we want, like gouging people's eyes out and undressing shoes.
Yes. How best to. Best to.
Sounds good.
All right. It was fun again. Let's make this a regular thing. And see ya, guys.
See you, Rama. See you, Andy. Take it easy.
Hey guys, have a good one.